Productive Dentist Academy podcast network.
This is one of the longer periods of holds for private equity. So you've got small cap funds, mid cap funds, and large cap funds with different theses. Healthcare is a component of that. Dental is historically a hedge to the downside. And by that, I mean dentistry is a very recession-proof business, if you will, very stable business.
Welcome to Investment Grade Practices Podcast, where we believe private practice dentists deserve to get the lifestyle today while building an asset for tomorrow. Join your host, Victoria Peterson, to design the practice of your dreams and secure your financial independence. Let's get started.
Welcome to another edition of the Investment Grade Practice Podcast. Joining me today is my very good friend, Matt Zolfo from Professional Transition Services. And Matt, you and I have had the pleasure of working together over the last 2 years very closely, helping a group of doctors make some choices about their future. It's been a joy and a pleasure to really get to know you and Kyle Francis and your whole team at PTS and kind of look at the underpinnings and the advisory that Professional Transition Services offers, because to say that you're a broker would be a misnomer. People kind of put transitions into one bucket. So we're here today to explore, what does transitions look like today? Who should be on your advisory team, and what's kind of happening in the market? So welcome, Matt. So glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here, Victoria. Appreciate your time.
All right. So let's kick it off here. Our investment grade practice listeners are pretty savvy. They're keeping up with the markets. But as a recap, we all know, Heartland pierced the veil in the 90s and the consolidation game began. It rocked on pretty steady, didn't even notice it for a long time. But in the pandemic, things shifted, things heated up. More players came in. And so let's start with that. Take us back to maybe 2021, what might have been happening over the last 3 or 4 years, and where you see the market today. And what if a doctor is contemplating selling, where's the mindset of the market today?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I've got a unique perspective on this because I started with PTS right through the pandemic, candidly. April, May of 2020. So post-pandemic, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of concern, there was a lot of unknown, right? On what was out there. And, probably 2019 and 2020, there was a lot of activity. And candidly, 2021, 2022, 2023 had been the same year over year. We kept doing more and more transactions for about the last 4 years. We've been steady state doing 70 to 100 deals a year, comprised of well over, call it 150 locations each year. We do a lot of multi-doctor and multi-location stuff. So ultimately, we saw an increase in, if you want to call it multiples, right? It's not all about your multiple, but rather your structure, but increase in valuations through 21, 22, and 23. In 24, interest rates went up. So we saw a plateau in those valuations. Some groups just quit buying and focused on same-store sales and optimizing the practices they had. And others continued to add practices. Candidly, money doesn't do any good sitting in the bank. You got to put it to work, right? So those that were already capitalized, or call it had a tranche of funds, still, did acquisitions. Now, rather than having 60 interested parties distilled down to 12 buyer interviews, distilled down to 10 LOIs, and, having to shuffle between 5 options, we had maybe 2/3 that. So we still got plenty of deals done, but ultimately, the activity broadly was at a plateau. Fast forward to this year, 2025, post-election, post-interest rates, things picked right back up. So it's been fun.
So even in the current trade war, tariff, the whole world blowing up, things are still on the rise. Lots of interest in this sector.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's no surprise if you just Google, private equity holds, you'll get 80 articles between North America and Europe that this is probably one of the longest hold periods for sophisticated capital, call it a family fund, an institutional fund, or a private equity fund. because they're seeking an outcome, a target for their return on invested capital. Well, that asset doesn't become more valuable unless it grows. So what we did see in 2024, late 2024 and 2025, is rather than recapitalizing the business and had an exit, a lot of folks went and got more capital. And by more, I mean trillions more, to the tune of 2 to 3, in healthcare specifically, to continue to grow and add partners. So, that trickles all down to our world, where deals are still getting done, but ultimately, nobody's got a crystal ball. And in, the next year or two, I think we'll see some folks realize those gains.
So let's zoom in on that piece just a little bit, because doctors who are selling into a private equity market, and there's lots of different ways of selling your practice. We're just specifically talking about that private equity market. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of just educating that needs to be done, because you hear a lot of get all your cash up front because they're never going to recap, and this is all hypothetical and this and that. So what I heard you say was, um, you'll get 80 articles on let's hold. Let's do
Well,
launch
not
plays and
that.
things like that. So
This is one of the longer periods of holds for private equity. So you've got small cap funds, mid cap funds, and large cap funds with different theses. Healthcare is a component of that. Dental is historically a hedge to the downside. And by that, I mean dentistry is a very recession proof business, if you will, a very stable business. So they can take on more risk if they have a dental platform within that. And most folks are looking for something like a 3 to 5 year timeline, and for at a 3 to 5 times return on invested capital. So call it a 400% return on your dollar. You invest $1, you get 4 back in year 3, 4, or 5. Well, with rates going up, right, and the pandemic being a black swan event, that's turned into a 5 or 6 year hold, or in some cases a 6 or 7 year hold. Now, that's not the case for every group. There are about 35 to 45 comps of groups through this, I'll call it peak timeline, have either had doctors monetize equity or had doctors exit in some fashion. But, it's been a longer time period because of those macroeconomic and global factors. The important thing is
you
it's
were
going to stay there forever, right?
that was going to be my question. If I were looking to sell my practice, let's say over the next 12 months, this is an area that is often overlooked. It's like understanding, it's called the recapitalization, the recap, when can I take more chips off the table, whatever so as a seller, I need to understand their investment thesis.
That's right.
Say it's 3 to 5 years. Do you recommend like dive into that deeper? What gives you the confidence that you could do that in 3 to 5 years, or should they expect more the 5 to 6 years or 8 years? How to
That's a great question. So what my advice there would be, A, get an advisor first and foremost. And B, you should never partner with an investor or, even another doctor, call it a 50-50 partnership with someone you don't like and you don't trust, right? So getting to know the group, the culture of that, ensuring that they're clinically agnostic, aren't going to change the name on the door, aren't going to come in and can the team, and aren't going to, dictate clinical practices. That's kind of thing one. Understanding the metrics of the financials is important as well. Normally that's done in diligence, right? We tell clients diligence is not just the buyer doing diligence on the seller, but us doing diligence on the buyer as well, right? The other big thing too is the advantage of using, a merger and acquisition firm like PTS is that we've got market comps. We play every day of the week in kind of the $1 to $15 million sandbox. And then about 2-3 times a quarter, we'll do a prospectus for a platform and take 2 or 3 of those to market to private equity every year. So we know what groups are going to recapitalize out. And we've been at this for 15 years. Kyle, God bless him, our founder and president, and I went to Baylor together. We've known each other since we were 19 and we'll be 43 this summer. But we've got 20 years of learnings in not just, doctor to doctor transitions, but doctor to group partnerships and then group to private equity, either seed round of capital, in an LBO buyout or recap. So, it's not that we just have our ear to the street. It's that, we're doing these types of transactions. So we really have a window into, what that outcome can look like and what groups are growing. I mean,
Let me ask you this question. on this thing about trends, what's happening in the trends, and then we'll get more specific. But there was a time where like my phone was ringing off the hook at Productive Dentist Academy. All of our clients were like, "Oh my God, I got this letter in the mail. What do I do?" And I just remember a few years back, to call it 2021, 2022, there was like this frenzy. And my first piece of advice is if somebody sent you if you got something in the mail and said, "Hey, I drove by and I really love your house. I'd like to buy it for X
Yeah.
number of dollars," would you just say sure and handle the keys?
Doctor, are you tired of repeating yourself with your team over and over again, and yet you still see treatment walk out the door? If so, you're not alone. The Clinical Calibration Institute, powered by Productive Dentist Academy, is an all-new online platform that unites your team around your philosophy of care, so patients can say yes with confidence and you grow with purpose. Including online curriculum with world-class faculty, monthly live mastermind sessions for each department within your practice, and an online private community, this is your home to grow. Head over to clinicalcalibration.com today to join every member of your team for one very low monthly membership fee. That's clinicalcalibration.com.
So there was this frenzy where doctors were like, "Yeah, such and such a company reached out. They offered me this. It sounded good, and they sold." And that was really all the diligence. They didn't hire a representative. They were told like, "Yep, we'll do it all for you." And doctors being doctors, they're like, "I saved the money." But they probably lost some things and diligence on the back end. Do you see that type of heavy prospecting from DSOs still going on today, where we're getting letters in the mail and doctors are just jumping and working to get a deal done?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's really only 2 or 3 companies in the country that do the type of transaction to the acumen that we do. And we're probably getting to 1 to 2 out of 10. So, 70-80% of the market is still probably partnering with a group direct. Now, here's the thing. That's still a good investment, right? And all this is about where A, what someone's timeline is, B, what they want their lifestyle to be, including stress and or time off, right? And then C, what does this asset, this goose laying golden eggs annually, if you will, of cash flow, where does that live best at where I'm at now, or does it live and grow faster in a different environment? So that's still the case in a group partnership. 10 practices are worth more than one. 100 practices are worth more than 10. It's called equity arbitrage. But to your point, any doctor that feels as though they're getting the same outcome without representation is lying to themselves. That is a falsehood. About once a week, we'll get a call from somebody that says, "Hey, I talked to a couple groups. I don't know what I'm looking at. Can you help me?" And we say, "Absolutely. Let's do a prospectus." And then, if we think we can better the outcome, then we'll take them to market and represent them. If we can't, then we won't. Right. And it's rare, but let's call it, maybe it's a 6 location in a great market, and the guy's got 2 partners and 7 associates, and somebody just made him a stupid offer, right? That's off market, or that's, really, really good. We'll tell him, "Listen, you're probably, this is probably a great option, and we can exclude them if you want, but we think you should be really educated on what's out there, so you're making the best decision when the time's right. If that's now, great. If it's later, even better, keep growing." So we want to be correct in those instances. And, we also want to cover our fee, right? I mean, there's a variety of different ways to represent a client in M&A. And, we do that from the deal side. We're not lawyers, we're not CPAs, we're not financial planners, and we're certainly not consultants. We've looked at buying firms like that over the course of time. We've looked at charging for consulting. We've looked at charging a retainer. And, that's just not us. We're doing 45 to 55 prospectuses a month. So we know what valuations are. 87% of those turn into a listing agreement, and 9 out of 10 close. So if I round high and say 100, well, on those 100 transactions, we'll have 6 to 9 letters of intent. That's 600 and 900 LOIs a year, right? So we'll know either where multiples are at, and or what that region of the country is going to trade at per se. So
Not always about the multiple, right? There
That's right.
can be, it's the way the deal is structured.
Yeah, that's right. Where the equity lives, how that's cut up, what the covenants are in terms of work back, whether or not that group is being accretive. I mean, if you think about it from, just, the stock standpoint, either a share price or a partnership, if the partnership's not growing, it's not becoming more valuable. And while this dental market is growing, you have to be accretive either in, seeing more patients or doing more procedures or being acquisitive with acquiring, additional practices. And there are some, would say most are still growing, but there are some that are not. And in that environment, that equity can get, shall we say, stuck, right? And not grow or take a longer time to grow. So we're really good at not just getting the highest offer, but making sure that the doctor is picking the group that's correct for them. I'll go back to a client of mine in Beaverton, Oregon, I had 2 years ago. His daughter was supposed to join the practice. She was at OHSU, about to graduate, fell in love her 4th year, and then moved to North Carolina with an oral surgery resident. And he had already added ops and all this other stuff. Well, he had talked to 2 or 3 groups direct and really didn't know what he was looking at. So fast forward, we ran process, had something like 32, 35 inquiries, did 8 to 10 buyer interviews. Ironically, he ended up settling on his original offer was about 3.2. We took that to 5.8, believe it or not, and ultimately ended up picking the same group that he liked from the get-go, but with our representation. And we made the caveat that they had an associate within the first 6 months of partnership. We said, he's working 5 days a week. We were counting on the daughter. And of course, they were thrilled to go do that. So, that's just one example of an instance where
Well, it sounds like that just prevents a whole lot of seller remorse, right? Like you turned over every stone and you don't come back later and go, oh man, I wish I hadn't sold for 3.2 because my buddy down the street got X for his. Like the process itself creates certainty. And that's one of the things, like with the doctors we work with and have tracked, it's like 78% of them can have some sort of post-sale remorse if they didn't know what the market truly was, did they get the fair value, and what am I going to do with my time after I sell?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and as we say to everybody, like whether it's us or any other advisor, if they can't more than cover their fee, either in negotiations or in acumen, then don't do a deal. Like someone that's got a million plus practice or multiple practices probably has a pretty sweet asset that's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash flow. So just wait. Doing nothing is an option. That's one of the things that, we tell folks. We want to be in the driver's seat and in a position when the time is right and not before. Where now that timeline in terms of dentistry is getting a little shorter.
I was going to say, let's go into that because that sounds like great sage advice, but you also had to color it in the context of the times.
Yeah.
Pandemic was a little different. Where are we going to be? I know you said you don't have a crystal ball, but I know you got one in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Little baby one. If you had to predict.
Yeah, data validates instinct, as I've always said. Back when I was starting.
Where are we going in the next couple of years? Like, can I just hold and wait?
So if I may be so candid, there's about 194,000 MPI numbers in the country for dentists. To my knowledge, about 45,000 of those are specialists. A portion of those are deceased. So there's about, call it 110,000 practicing general dentists in the United States. Don't quote me on this. It's back of the napkin stuff we've been kind of researching. I've been looking at forever. That said, with all the comps and data that we buy and that we know of and that we mine in press releases and stuff like that, as of the beginning of 2025, we are something like 38% consolidated in the dental world. That said, if you go Google Harvard Business Review equity arbitrage consolidation in healthcare, what's happening now happened in hospital 40 years ago, pharmacy 30 years ago, dermatology 10 years ago, vet 5 years ago. And the valuations on this timeline trending towards something like 60% are on a bell curve. So, when I started in 2004 at Henry Schein Dental in Dallas, Texas, starting dental practices, you could buy a practice for 67% of collections. And we will end up there again, candidly, in probably 3 to 5 years. But the other healthcare verticals through consolidation had been through 4 or 5 turns of liquidity. And by that, I mean recaps. And once you get to something like 50 to 55% consolidation, multiples start coming down. because investors don't have to pay that, right? And groups don't have to pay that, right? On top of that, there's probably dentists that, a doctor went to dental school with, they wouldn't let touch their mouth with an Explorer, much less a handpiece. That guy's probably not going to pass a chart audit, getting into the clinical acumen of a good group, right? So in summary, we think that we've got something like 3 to 5 years left with 1 or 2 more turns of liquidity. Now, that's not to say, this is all big doom and gloom. It's not. A dentist is always going to be able to hang a shingle and see patients. They're going to do it on their own, like they're doing now, or like they did 50 years ago, right? They're not going to get the culture and the acumen and the buying power and the PPO relationships that you would in the event you plugged into, a strategic partner. But you can own your own business. On top of that, there are doctors at Heartland that have equity that has 2,800 locations between Canada and North America, but that's not growing at 4 times return on invested capital year over year. It's growing at about 30 to 40%, to my knowledge. That was 50 or 60% a year or two ago. So there is value in having equity at a later stage. It's just not going to grow as fast. So I'm a bit in the weeds here, but those are some of the things that, we talk with folks about based on where they're at and their growth life cycle of the business, whether or not they want to play golf an extra day a week or not, whether or not they want to spend another day at home with their kids, during the week. If you're a mom and your kids are now teenagers, you're doing a lot of unpaid Uber duties. I'm a dad and I'm doing the same. So, whatever stage of life folks are at and what they want that outcome to be, we want to be correct and want to help them be in the driver's seat of what that looks like when the time's right. So, I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's 10 years. My 15-year-old and 13-year-old, are in private school and still need to finish through college. So, I got 20, 30 more years to work here. But yeah, that based on what we know, that's about where we're at.
Okay, so let's say that there's this 3 to 5 year window at peak multiples. So what I heard is, yeah, you'll have sellable practice. Is it going to be a peak multiple? And that's where we do a lot of work, because honestly, when doctors come to us, they're not sellable, even if they wanted to sell. And that's the first thing that we do at PDA is say, are you bank ready and are you sellable? Because in between there, if you're those things, then you've got choice. Like I could choose to expand. I could choose to bring on an associate because things are going well. Or I could choose to, it's cash flowing really well, and I could choose to do other things with it. But choice is what we're really all about, is like helping you get to financial freedom, working within your practice, even though you don't have to work anymore. So we'll help you get cash flowing and investing, and we've got lots of different partners for that. So you're working by choice. And so now some doctors are thinking about their choice of, what do I do if I'm ready to start really slowing down in the next 3 to 5 years? And sometimes what we see are triggers like, it did grow, and now I got HR and people and things, and it's hard. Or the marketing in my area got more competitive because more doctors moved in, and I'm not just getting new patients like this on the automatic anymore, and that's a little harder. So there's like a lot of really good reasons to partner with someone who has recruiting and marketing and things like that, all the back office stuff in place. But if we were to look in the next, 2 to 5 years, and we'll even say 10 years, because at PDA we say exit planning is business planning. So
Yeah.
if you had the 1, 2, or 3 for a doctor listening to this podcast today going, this all sounds really good, but what would be my first step to even know
Yeah,
to
no,
do something?
there's 2 things that come to mind. One is know the terrain before you navigate it, right? And information is power. There's never been, other than today, more information available, both publicly and privately, in the financial markets, in a transaction, values and things of that nature. So have a prospectus done, whether it's us or somebody else. Have somebody look under the hood. You've looked at thousands of P&Ls. We've done thousands and thousands, and by that I mean somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 prospectuses over the course of time. So we can tell you, a average supply percentage for a practice in the $1 million to $1.5 million range, or the $3 million to $4.5 million range, or for an implant heavy practice, or for a practice that only does clear aligners and doesn't do any straight wire ortho, or for an oral surgeon that is, hawk and teeth only, wisdom teeth, or oral surgeon that works with a prosthodontist. Like, all that data can, tell folks where they fall in the realm of normalcy across the country. And then two, just having a prospectus or evaluation on file is great for a trust or for a will, or, just to kind of know what the business is worth. It's one's life work, right? It's their arguably the most valuable asset, exclusive of some, family fund or family trust they have coming down the road. And it's certainly, has a lot of people tied to it, team members and patients within the community. So, you can't advise on what we can't advise on what we don't know, which is why we want to be correct. So our prospectuses are basically free. But once you have that information, whether what I would say is anybody that's basically, believe it or not, our average client last year, average at PTS, was 42 years old. The year prior was 38. So most of the folks that we work with that are plugging into a strategic partner or a financial partner, or looking at a transition of some sort, that are still in growth mode, right? They got 5, 10, 15 years to work, are, late 30s, early 40s. That said, if you're 25 and don't own anything yet, there's nothing to value. And on the same token, if you're, 45, 50, even 55, and think you want to work 1, 2, 5, 10 years, you should probably know what that practice is worth if an individual buys it today, and what that practice could be worth 3 to 5 to 10 years down the road in the event that equity lives in a new environment. And we've got folks that we update prospectuses for quarterly. It's rare, but it does happen. Folks that we update prospectuses for every 12, 18 months. And we do that because, if you think, we are sell-side representation only. So, if a doctor can get a business to a $5 million valuation versus a $3 million valuation, we're going to have to tell them to wait, right? You should hang tight, keep doing what you're doing.
I think that's why we love working with you so much, and the whole team at PTS, Kim and Stanton and Brent and Kyle. I've gotten to know so many of you, is that there is this space between your P&L and balance sheet that your CPA looks at, and between a traditional practice management, because PDA, we do practice management, but it's not what doctors really think about with practice management. We do all of those things. We'll help you calm down your team. We'll teach phone skills. We'll do, those kinds of systems work. But more importantly, we go, where you at?
Yeah.
Where are you at? And so that moving from 3 to 5 million in value, that doesn't happen because the calendar turned over and you just worked it for another couple of years. It's because you found, I call them the IKEA shortcuts. So working with someone like you, like pen on the wall.
Yeah.
That's what this is. And we also work with a lot of financial planners, right? So we're not the financial planners. So to meet my end goal for financial wealth and security, my goals, I need to be at 7 million. I'm currently have 2 million. My practice could be worth 3 million. Now I've got a couple of years. You could work with someone like PDA or someone else to say, how do I grow the value? Because we want you to work smarter. We actually slow down practices. We don't cram a bunch more patients in there. We optimize the patient that you have, get your service mix right, and all that. Because you went really fast, but there was this huge point that you went in there. What flavor of practice do you have right now? And I can think of 3 offices that we're working with where the owner doctor built a beautiful practice, and it followed his clinical journey, and now it's highly surgical and it's boutiqued, and there's like 2,000 to 3,000 patients sitting over here that if they have a toothache, they'll call you. But we didn't expand hygiene. We didn't bring in a bread and butter dentist. And we didn't monetize that part of the practice. And so when you go to sell, they're going to go, well, if you leave and there's no surgery, what is there of value? So it's not always about the profits and the EBITDA, it's structure. So those are, for me, what you're saying is there's compelling reasons to get that prospectus now. So you could have people like you and me and the financial planners and everybody look at it and craft a strategy that's bigger than what traditional practice management does, which is like, well, hey, you did $1.5 million this year. What's your goal next year? So that's coaching.
Yeah.
What
No.
goal?
I mean, that last scenario, what you're talking about is optimizing the practice, right?
Yes.
In theory, whether it's any asset, a home, a car, a business, you would, in theory, want to sell at an optimum value, right? In the case of what we do in M&A, you'd want to partner or plug in to an ecosystem of health at optimum value where you've maximized what you can do with your own, pun intended, through all the blood, sweat, and tears of owning it, also pun intended. So that said, if and this whole concept of, I hate to keep talking about multiples, but the whole concept of a multiple of EBITDA is years of earnings. So waiting 1 year, if you were going to get, let's say, end up getting, 2 to 3 to 4 times EBITDA 10 years from now, well, that's fine. Well, if you're going to hang on to it for 15, well, then you got an 18 times per se, right? So there's no harm in waiting. On the same token, for that doctor that is doing all on fours or hybrids or uber surgical, and the associate's doing some of the bread and butter stuff, but that's not maybe optimized, whether from a treatment planning standpoint or a clinical standpoint, or you needed to add an associate sooner rather than later, you never got around to it. Well, at that stage, that's a really good cash flow vehicle for the owner, but you also have to find someone's two hands to backfill that, whether that's at 72 or at 57 or at 80 years old.
42. Yeah.
And, at that stage, throwing the keys in the mailbox, it might have to be the scenario if it's a rural practice, right? So,
And there's no shame in that. There's no problem in that, as long as you cash flowed and you were very prudent and a good scenario. So let's end on this, because you and I, we have talked for hours over lunch and over dinner. So let's bring us to a good conclusion, because I thought you also brought up a really great point there. So even though we're talking about to the sellers about what's happening, it's really prudent to understand the buyer scenario, because going into a buyer's market with established, whether it's a private group, an emerging DSO, an established DSO, or private equity, those sorts of environments, I heard you say, let's optimize it, then leverage it, because they'll be able to take it to the next level where you probably couldn't take it by yourself.
yep. Yeah.
When there's this, I just want to ask you this question: is there this other scenario of, I'm going to max it out, and then I'm going to go find an associate that will partner and buy in, and another partner to buy in? I don't see that working out as well. I see, like, if you're going to do a partnership over time, you start when the practice is smaller, do an equity growing together, do a little more equity, because it's hard to sell in one chunk to a private person a $3 to $7 million asset. Private dentist. Do you see the same thing?
No, we definitely do. And candidly, that landscape changed a ton. I did my first new office at the age of 21 in 2004, if you can believe it. That gal and her husband are good friends of mine, and now are partnered in a group, and that group is recapping round 2 here this summer. But to your point, over the course of time, goals change and needs change and life happens and this, that, and the other. So in the event, wherever that person would like to be on the journey of the life cycle of their career, again, knowledge is power and data validates instincts. So knowing what that's worth and kind of, which route to go, whether to do another location or add an associate, those things are fairly easily the lens with which the market will view the value of that business. We're very good at. Don't do it with your CPA. It will be incorrect. Don't do it with your financial planner. It will be incorrect. At the risk of sounding arrogant, it's factual, unless they're doing 75 to 100 transactions a year with individuals and large specialty transactions and strategic partnerships. They just won't know, what the comps are in that environment. But, to your point, even if it is selling to another individual, those things take time. Based on the profile of the practice, whether it's urban or rural, whether the doctor wants to work another year or 3, whether it's heavy, super GP or referodontist, right? Is kind of the spectrum of the doctor that refers out everything versus the one that doesn't let anything leave the door, and on a real, I'll end with this, like on a very broad level, most doctors graduating in dental school now don't want to own anything. They want to show up. They've had Netflix for 10 years. They lease a car if they own one. They Uber or Lyft everywhere. and they rent, they own home. Like, I don't mean to, doom and gloom zillennials or mullen.
But it's also $500,000 on student
Just
debt.
the pool of people looking to own is smaller. On top of that, when I started in this business, the average dentist had about $225,000 in dental school debt or school debt, undergraduate. And now, I mean, I'm not lying, that number's north of $700,000 in debt. So, that
It's escalating. It seems like every 6 months. I was still at 500,000, but
yeah. So the it's more likely if a practice is doing over $1 million, certainly more than 2 million, that an individual can't afford to pay what the practice is worth. And knowing kind of where folks fall on that spectrum is important. I think that's kind of your core audience. The average dental practice, as a closing note, does 798,000 in collections as of 2023 average, which means half are doing below that, half are doing above that. So this echelon of, your core client, our core client, are the folks we're kind of, speaking to. But, know your value, basically, regardless of what, whether that's a year out or 20.
yeah, I love it. I love it so much. I think it's like having an annual physical, right? Knowing your blood pressure, knowing your cholesterol, knowing your book value, knowing areas that you could optimize. It's just being a smart, savvy owner. Matt, as always, so great to spend time with you. If people want to get in touch, and I heard you mention several times, we do complimentary prospectuses for doctors. There's no obligation. They just want to figure out what it's like or have a conversation with you. How do they reach out and connect?
Yeah. So email is matt@professionaltransition.com or LinkedIn. Matt Zolfo. I'd say there's only one of me, but I have a cousin named Matt Zolfo. It'll be clear on LinkedIn who's who. That's ZOLFO on LinkedIn. Just DM and I'll reach out. But yeah, we do a lot of those. We at PTS, we believe that trust is earned and value is garnished through really hard work. So we're not shy about rolling up our sleeves to get a prospectus spit out. It's a good thing to have, again, just on file and to know kind of where the market's at.
I love it. And we'll put all of that in the show notes too. Again, thank you so much for the work that you and your team does at PTS. Our industry is better for it, and our doctors are more educated because of it. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks for your time, Victoria.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investment Grade Practices Podcast. If you find value in this episode, help us spread the word by passing it along to a dental friend, subscribe, and give us a like on iTunes or Spotify. Learn more about building your investment grade practice at productivedentist.com today.